Welcome to Integrated Insights with ICCG. For more than 30 years, our team has partnered with small business owners to prepare for and navigate the business transaction process. Pull up a chair as we share stories and insights from our experience on all sides of the M&A table. All right, welcome to this week's podcast. I'm Michael, and I'm here with Grant and Dave. Today, we're going to talk about partnerships. So to start out, what are the types of partners?
Yeah, good ones and bad ones. No, I think, structurally, there are different kinds of partnerships. Obviously, there's a general partnership. There's, the most common one these days is actually an LLC, which is driven by an operating agreement. But there are limited partnerships, which limited partners are typically not involved, or they are, by definition, not involved in the operation at all. Sometimes they're financial people that bring some capital to the table. The general partner are the know-hows or the governors of the organization and managers. And so there are different kinds of partnerships that have been put together for different purposes, sometimes to protect some of the partners. Like a limited partnership, the limited partners are protected from liability, whereas the general partner is not.
Yeah. Can I put onto that? I think that the question, how, what are the different kind of partners? And I think that was very accurate. There's good ones and bad ones, but all partnerships are, they're undergirded, so to speak, by some sort of an entity. And that's what's Grant's talking about. And since you brought up LLCs, Grant, I think it'd be really helpful for a lot of people. I think, because LLCs are kind of the thing, for the past decade or so, or more than that, I guess. We formed our S Corp, 1996 or something like that. And so Grant and I have been officially business partners for 25 years, and our entity is an S corporation. And so, but an LLC is formed a little bit differently, right? And you mentioned that, and I think people don't necessarily understand the difference between the operating manager, the limited members, and all of that. I think that would be really helpful to explain.
Yeah, I think you can spend a lot of time on what entity should be chosen, but I think for purposes of today, I think just like you said, Dave, partners get into business together for a specific reason. And matching that with the type of entity that they choose is really important. Everybody can, go to all kinds of posts on the internet about what entity is best, but you really can't pick the right one until you know the basic scenario between the partners, right? If there's 2, if there's 10, if there's 50, what is a partner mean? If you're a partner in a law firm, for example, or a CPA firm, it doesn't mean you own any equity whatsoever. It's a position, it's a title. And so is the partnership because the person has equity, or because they don't have equity? Is it because they are integral to the operation, so you're going to give them a title that keeps them there? Or is it a few guys or girls that are getting into business together to benefit together, to run the business together? All of those types of different kinds of partnerships exist. And again, whether you're wrapped in an entity or wrapped with an agreement, a partnership agreement, it really doesn't matter. It is, it obviously matters in accomplishing your goals, but ultimately you're partners. And so doing business with another person or other people can be really, really great. And it can be really, really bad.
Yeah, and actually, and some people try to kind of hide. Well, nothing will happen if we have these limited partners, so to speak, in they're a member of an LLC, or they're limited partners in a limited partnership. And your general makes all the calls, or your managing member makes all the calls. But the reality is that we've seen lawsuits fly between those two parties multiple times, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, ultimately it comes down to who do you want to be in business with, and who do you think you can be in business with for the time frame that you've got in mind. And
A
most
lot of
people going,
people,
I could do this for me forever.
yeah, I think a lot of people draw the analogy of business partners with marriage, right? And it's not marriage, but it is very much like a marriage where you have to, go into it with a lot of care. I nearly said trepidation, but a lot of people go into a partnership with some romance, like, oh, this is going to be great. I like
Right.
spending time with
Yep.
you.
Honeymoon
We're
phase.
we get along so well, and it doesn't always end that way.
In fact, my first, I won't go into details, but our first partnership and our first venture went exactly. This is going to be awesome. It's going to be awesome until like the second week of operations, and all of a sudden, I mean, I'll say that they wigged out, and to this day, don't really understand how or why. But bottom line is, it left the people who wanted. I mean, basically walked away from it, and that's happened. It happened to you and I, Grant. At a couple of occasions when someone just walked away from their responsibilities, and it wasn't anything we had done. It was just their station in life or whatever. And those things can't always be flushed out in advance. But I would do everything you can to flush them out in advance.
So go into that a little bit more, Dave. Like you just talked about, it started well for you guys, but obviously after 25 years, it must have changed some. How has y'all's partnership changed over the last 25 years?
Uh, this is where the kind of like the marriage thing comes comes about.
Hey, well, yes.
So Grant and I think it's really important. So we went into this, I think, cautiously but excitedly, and we were both ready for some changes in life. And we had the opportunity to buy one of his clients' businesses. He had a CPA firm, and that allowed us to kind of launch out and do something. But there became some life changes for me and my wife that we ended up moving from the Texas area up to Seattle, and that was to help start a church years ago, and that was something that we weren't planning on, but um, you know uh, we did it, and that caused us to have to kind of reposition what we were going to do. And there were some really tough years in there. We're very open about that. They're not really fun to think about, but here we are years later. And I think there's a couple things that held us together through that. Number one, our families were great friends from the beginning. We made sure that our families got to know each other, and that was a catalyst. Quite frankly, our faith drives what we do, and so um, so we started out with some of the same basics foundations, which I think was really important, and so I think that was something that kind of held us together. And would you agree, Grant?
Yeah,
It
I
was all
think I
three.
think I would go all the way on the other side of that, and I would say if all that held us together was your expertise or my expertise, then we would have parted ways a long time ago. I think the friendship and the common values that come out of our faith just held us together, or really held us at the table through some hard conversations. And I think that determination to make it work because of those things, because the sum of this is at the bottom line. This is what you have to be convinced of. You have to be convinced of in our sort of situation that Dave and Grant are better than Grant by himself, and vice versa. And I think you once you know that and you bank on that, then you say, okay, let's go. And you go, just uh, you understand that separating is hard. You put things in place ahead of time that would script what that might look like. That's helpful. But at the end of the day, you fight for it because you are convinced that the sum of the parts is more valuable and better and more fun than just being the parts by themselves.
Yeah.
So
And that takes a lot of work up front. I mean, you have to really think through this. And a lot of people are like, hey, this guy's got $200,000. I'll make him a partner and it's going to be awesome. But, what are the expectations surrounding that? And what if it doesn't go well? Then what? All these different things. And I think sometimes people are afraid to ask those questions up front and they just jump into this. And I think that's where honestly getting someone in the middle. We had a father years ago come and say, hey, I want to pass my company generationally down through a purchase type deal. Can you help me determine if my kids are going to be able to be good partners? And that was fascinating for us because we got to help with this generational, and it was a fascinating discussion because there were some, there had to be some hard discussions, but it's going great today. And so I think getting someone to help determine what that looks like for you and your partners before you start signing legal paperwork that's going to bind you legally, is really, really important. And then I think having the tough conversations about things like compensation and how funds are going to be distributed and dividend, all these types of things. That's really, and ours has changed through the years. For a while, I was not able to be as involved with the business as Grant was. And so, and for the last several years, I've been just as involved as Grant. So, we've had to change things along the way, but that comes out of a deep commitment and integrity that I think we both strive to have. And that's not saying we've never talked about, we had that discussion about every 5 years. Hey, you think we ought to, do you foresee a time we maybe ought to dissolve the relation, not the relationship, but the partnership. And we look at each other and go, nah, it sounds like too much work. That'd be a lot harder than actually kind of making it work. Right.
Well, so talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
Grant, I want to go into, you mentioned putting some things in place to help you both drive for that partnership and to fight for it. So I feel like, Dave, what you just said there speaks to that a little bit too. Talk about that a little bit more. What can partners put in place to help them fight for that partnership?
Yeah, every partnership agreement typically has something with regards to buying out the other partners or a partner. Typically, there's a limitation on who can buy. So, for example, in a partnership, I can't just go sell my interest to Joe Blow. I've got to first offer it to the other partners, those kinds of clauses. You'll see it in a partnership agreement in a partnership or an LLC operating agreement if it's an LLC, or bylaws to the corporation if it's a corporation. Sometimes it's in a shareholder agreement in a corporation. But at the end of the day, there are ways that you can make it a whole lot easier. What's difficult is that those agreements are not updated. So, for example, as the roles in the business change, and they do change, as the roles change, then sometimes those agreements need to be updated because they kind of become not applicable. Sometimes it's just as simple as the valuation. We're going to value this company at, certain times earnings or certain number times, or maybe book value is one I spoke to somebody about this morning. And those are just, they become antiquated. And so making sure that those agreements are updated along with, the importance of the partners just change. And, if you have a manufacturing entity that starts a retail side, and all of a sudden the retail side becomes so prolific that the manufacturing is not that important because they're retailing a whole bunch of products that they're not making. Well, the guy that was in charge of manufacturing to begin the company is super, super important, and maybe really the key to the success. And at the end of the day, sometimes the company grows so much that the head of retail now is the guy or the girl. And so you've got to you got to take all that into consideration when you're setting the value of that person's shares. And so making sure they're updated is super important.
Yeah.
Do you have a story to go with that? Do you have an example of a time a business owner came to you, they were talking to you about the problems they were having, and a lot of those pointed back to that agreement that just wasn't updated?
Yeah, I have. We had a manufacturing company that I was thinking about when I was just talking about that example, that was all about making furniture, and it ended up having 130 retail stores across the country, and so initially the guy that was making the furniture was the guy. And eventually, there were 3 or 4 other partners that were very, very valuable to the business because they're the ones that proliferated that retail chain across the country, and their shares became very valuable, and their role was very valuable, and so there's the larger the organization, the more valuable the guy is that holds the purse strings, or that is the sort of the CFO, right? And so that guy becomes super valuable all of a sudden. He knows what's going on. He's enabling the growth, all those kinds of things. And so people's roles become more important. Their shares become, more important to hold on to. And so, all those things change. And the value of that company changed significantly over the life cycle of that business. And I think, making sure that the partnership was held together through those days, and roles maybe were switched around and changed, was hard work.
Yeah, I think another example I was just thinking about was in the last couple of years where we sold a company and there had been some transactions. There had been a couple partners in a couple decades ago that had sold their piece, or they had divided kind of territories and everything, but it wasn't documented very well, and the documentation that was done couldn't put their hands on it for a while, and then it wasn't very clear to where the buyers almost got spooked out of the deal because it was like, I think maybe we're going to have competitors before we know it, and which wasn't the case, but it was really hard. I mean, just documenting that is really, really important if people are looking at exiting at some point. Make sure that what's happened with your partners, and make sure that's documented so that there's not any legal issues in the future.
So, Grant, you've mentioned a couple times shares, buying out your partner, that kind of thing. So, every time you're bringing a partner in, do you always give them equity? Is there always equity as part of that?
Yeah, and this is what I said in the first place, right? Partners are not always equity owners. They sometimes is a title. And but I think what you're asking is do you have to give equity away when you take on a partner? And the answer is no. In fact, Dave and I have always said you need to guard equity. And so that's where sometimes in corporations or even LLCs, there's something called phantom shares, which gives the economic benefit of equity, but without the actual equity, because it brings all kinds of issues, and it's expensive to hand an employee stock or an interest in the company. For example, if let's just say ICCG is worth $100 and I give 10% of the business to one of our employees, then I'm giving value, and therefore it's a taxable event. And so we have to pay taxes on that $10, and that's just sometimes deemed a waste of money and of time, and it's awkward because I might be doing it to keep that employee, but at the end of the day, I might not satisfy that employee, and now he wants to get bought out. And now I've got to now buy that 10% back. And so a lot of times it's phantom shares nowadays where the employee gets the economic benefit of ownership as long as he's working there.
Michael, before we end here. I don't know how much longer we're going to go, but I do want to say this, that, along the way, we've been really fortunate and to have some really good partners that we've brought in on certain deals. We haven't only just done intermediary work. We've owned a portfolio of companies along the way ourselves. And each of those, we would typically bring in somebody. And at one time, I think, or the most partners we had, Grant, was 6 of us, I think.
Yeah.
We kind of lose track. And, each of them were brought in for different reasons. Typically, we bring a company in and they came with the company. We chose to have them come with the company. We bought the company. And then oftentimes they would then, maybe the next deal, they were part of that as well, to where this group of people, as long as we were in a certain industry that we were operating in, they had a little piece of the action moving forward. And they all had different things that they brought to the table, which was really great. And to this day, we could get together for dinner from all parts of the country and we never miss a beat, because it went that well. There were hiccups along the way, of course, there always will be, but it was a fun time. I would say it's probably some of the most fun we've had with the companies. And Grant, there's one, you had some examples of the one person you're talking about that's been really a good utility for us, through the years,
Yeah. When
not
you're
just as a
buying a
friend.
company, and you need that guy. This happened in a couple of industries we went in. Dave and I didn't know squat about the industry, but we really liked the economic model, and so we got into it, and we gave equity in that company to in this particular case, this one individual. And the type of equity that we gave him initially in that business was a limited partnership interest because we didn't know him. And I didn't want the business handicapped by somebody I didn't know making decisions. Today, he ends up being one of our closest friends who we trust probably more than we trust most other people in our lives. And we would give him, and we have in other businesses, the same type of interest as we have. But when you're going into that particular business, you got to have your eyes wide open to the possibility of it not working out. In that same industry, we actually bought another business, gave equity as part of the compensation, and that agreement had a buyout clause in it, and we had to buy them out, because it just became impossible to deal with. And in one company, we walked in when we bought the company and we gave a certain amount of equity to everybody who was an employee from the top down. And but it wasn't voting shares. It was a C corp, and we gave them non-voting shares, so B shares, and it worked out tremendously for the employees as well as us. But we needed them around in order, because we didn't know anything. That one was a technology company, and as everybody knows, Dave and I do not need to be we don't need the password to a server.
No.
And so the point was, when you're buying a business, structuring that capital stack, which is the technical term to who owns what, is super important.
Yeah. Yeah. That will drive a lot.
That's awesome. Well, we've talked a lot about starting a partnership and how partnership changes over time. But when you do decide to sell and move towards selling or even buying in mergers or acquisitions, how does having a partner affect that process, the acquisition process?
Well, hopefully you're on the same page. We
How often does that happen?
well, I think most of the time. I think most of the time, by the time we're getting contacted, someone's decided this is what we're going to do. Um, you almost have more issues with maybe upper level management who aren't partners but see themselves as partners, or may have been promised that, hey, you're going to be a partner someday. Oftentimes, they're more likely to scuttle a deal. Um, than after. Yeah, we've just seen that happen. But I think that hopefully, I mean, we've sat down with partners sometimes, just kind of help them walk through what would this look like. And oftentimes, a husband and wife team that's built this amazing business, and one really wants to sell, the other one doesn't, and we're not there to break up a marriage. So we'd rather them get on the same page and at the same time, and then want to sell the business down the road. Kind of help them through that process a little bit. But there's a lot to digest, and sometimes it's just not understanding. There's this thing out there that all PE groups are evil, and we've had people say we'll never sell to a PE group, but they don't understand all the different types of buyers that are out there, and that there's really, really great buyers that even would call themselves private equity groups, and we've met them, we've dealt with them. Wonderful people, have great intentions and do great jobs, and so that's what I would say. Grant, what would you?
Yeah, just, get a third party in the room. That's what we do, right? And let's talk through what actually can be expected, because a lot of people have fears at change. And so, once they deal with knowns and with possible outcomes, then you can make a good decision. But just thinking, oh my gosh, I want to sell, my partner doesn't want to sell, or vice versa, and just saying, oh, we're never going to come to agreement, that's short-sighted. You need to get an intermediary like us in the room whose principal desire is to get everybody on the same page, and then certainly we'd love to help you sell.
And earlier we talked about outdated agreements, that kind of thing. Can partners bringing outdated agreements to the table when they're ready to sell, even if they're on the same page, can that complicate the process?
Any agreement is subject to change with agreement. So, for example, I might agree that that Dave and I are that the company's worth $100 and we're going to split the proceeds. Well, if we agree to something different, then that becomes the new agreement. It's the only worst case scenario. You have to operate in your existing agreement. But if you can agree to something different, then you agree to something different. So everything is subject to a revision, as long as you're working together and you understand the reasons for that.
Awesome. Well, hey, that's all our time today. Dave, Grant, thanks so much for jumping on here with me. And that wraps up another episode of Integrated Insights with ICCG. Be sure to subscribe and stay tuned for more stories from our team. We love hearing from our listeners. If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover, please send us an email in the show notes. For more information about ICCG, please check us out on our website or follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube. Until next time, there's always a seat at our table.